in our definition. So again, a definition hopefully just provides context. So we all have different interpretations of what resilience means to us. And so having this definition helps us to make sure that this is kind of how we define it and how we feel resilience is. So we define it as an individual's capacity to adapt positively to pressures, setbacks, challenge and change in order to optimize performance and maintain well-being. So the reason why we want to kind of highlight these is that it's a capacity. So back to Joe's comment that it is something that you can develop. It's not just about adapting. So we all know that adaptation is something that we need to do in the face of challenges, but fundamentally we can adapt in a negative way. So it's about adapting in a positive way, which is really, really important. Now, right now we're experiencing a significant challenge as a society, but it's also about the little things as well, and they can be cumulative. So it's about the pressures, setbacks, challenge and change. And I think in particular, when I'm thinking about people within the NHS, not only are dealing with the fundamental work stress associated with having to manage and adapt to change in a fundamentally just, you know, unforeseen situation, but also having to deal with the little day-to-day pressures of living your life, of, you know, if you've got children at home and being able to take kids to school. So it's just a very, very significant set of challenges, and those challenges can be cumulative. But fundamentally, why is resilience important? Is because it can help you maintain your well-being and optimize your performance, so you're able to perform at your best more regularly. So lots of research and evidence, and I'm probably just thinking about time. I'm not going to spend too much time, but the main research around resilience is about acting as a buffer against stress. And it's beneficial because it's shown related to job performance, engagement, happiness, satisfaction, experiencing less burnout. Huge amounts of research showing that, and we've done our own research looking into that specifically. But the key thing being is that right now, many of you are experiencing stress on a daily basis, and it's currently quite cumulative. You're not only not able to kind of take the time out to de-stress like we used to because we're in lockdown, so there's no those typical things that we do on the weekend or our own free time, which we're able to basically, you know, bring ourselves down, get to ourselves into a sort of state of relaxation. Those have been taken away. And on top of that, we've got significant amounts of stress in the workplace. Many people having to adapt, you know, roles changing, being able to fundamentally change your behavior on a day-to-day basis because of the nature of this pandemic. And when we think about stress, stress is actually something which can be perceived in a variety of ways. We can think of it as in relation to our physiological system, of there is something in our environment and that causes a reaction in our physiology. But you can also think about it in a very pure state of actually stress can be defined as a non-specific response of a body to any demand that's made of it. So you can think of stress as almost just fundamentally a reaction to your environment, or you can think of it as more of a dynamic process where it is basically the demands of that environment are more significant than your capacity, and therefore it causes stress. And so this is, I can imagine, the biggest issue that many of your colleagues are dealing with right now. You are constantly being bombarded by stress because you're not having the opportunity to be able to relax and manage that stress. And the issue with that stress is that if you're experiencing it so much and so regularly, you can fall into a state of burnout. Now, simultaneously, stress is not always a challenge. It's actually a benefit because it promotes us into action. So, for example, if you look at performance and stress, the relationship is typically some experience of stress is not a bad thing because it upregulates your capacity to deal with that challenge. So from a physiological level, that stress actually enables you to perform better. But simultaneously, if it's too much, you end up in a state of burnout. So that's exhaustion, ill health, breakdown. So those are the things which I imagine is happening more regularly because of the situation we're all in. but particularly for people who are on the front line having to deal with this health crisis right now. And so what we're going to do is just talk about these psychological resources that can be used. So most of the strategies that we're going to be talking about will be sitting in this psychological set of resources that you can use. This is about how you perceive your environment and the sort of behaviours in terms of that you can display that can address these issues. But it's also worth noting that actually there are other elements which really can influence your capacity to deal with stress or deal with challenge and change, which we won't go into as much detail with, but it's worth kind of recognizing as something. And it's stuff to do with your biological needs and meeting those biological needs. So I'm going to briefly pass over to Joe. As mentioned previously, has a lot of experience in endurance activities, but he also has a lot of experience of how the benefits of that physical well-being can impact on your mental well-being. So I'm just going to pass.
Thank you, Ali. I suppose when we look at biological needs and we look at needs fundamentally for being a human being, we're getting to the core of the onion, really. What is it that makes a person, happy, thrive, and get the best out of ourselves or the best out of other people? And as with all living organisms, whether it's a plant or a person, if our needs are being met, then we are predisposed to growth and well-being. We all have needs, obviously biological needs. As doctors, I don't need to tell you about those. Physiological needs, but psychological needs. We have needs for meaning in our life. We have need for connection in our life. We have a need for purpose and feeling we're treated fairly, for example. And some of these needs are being pulled away from us during the COVID crisis, lockdown, without getting the interaction we might crave. But the great thing is, as human beings, as with any living organism, we have the resources, we have the innate human resources to meet our needs. So we have the ability to connect with people, to empathise with others, to problem solve when things go wrong, use our IQ, to adapt our behaviour. To learn new things or to reflect on the past and learn from what's happened in order to become more effective in the future. But the trick is learning how to harness that resource, our innate potential, in order to meet our needs, to be happy and fulfilled. And this is really what we do as psychologists, and this is what we're talking about in terms of resilience. And I think Ali's going to mention later, but one of the key themes is managing your emotional state. If you can manage your emotions so you feel calm and relaxed, then it helps us to think better. It helps us to see the wood from the trees. And a lot of resilience issues are bound up with exaggerated, catastrophizing thinking. And if you want to be able to think clearly and use your brain effectively, essentially you need to manage your body as well. In fact, too much stress reduces our intellectual capacity, our cognitive functioning. Think a nice metaphor for this is in the workplace. Think of your body as the workforce and your brain as the management. Now, if you want the workforce to be effective, you've got to listen to it. You've got to listen to the feedback. You've got to listen to what they're saying. And if you don't listen to the feedback of the workforce, it's going to down tools, go on strike and become disruptive. The same is the case for the body. So if you want to make best use of yourself, you need to pay attention to what's going on at an emotional level. And ideally pick on emotions when they're lower emotions, and before they become so powerful, they interfere with our capacity to think clearly. Because thinking, reasoning is often our way out, our way through problems. So when we go for counselling and support, it's often because we need to borrow somebody else's ability to work things out, because we're so wrapped up in emotion, we can't actually think clearly. So managing your emotional state is a big part, I think, to resilience. And I'm going to, at the end of this webinar, just talk to you through a brief model of different states of emotion and how we can manage them. So I'll leave it there, Ali, and hand back to you.
Thanks, Joe. So yeah, and I think that body mind question is really important, and I think the key question sometimes as well, from just thinking about from a survival perspective, is especially when you've been put under so much pressure for such an extended amount of time, I think asking yourself some fundamental questions around, am I getting an opportunity to get out? Am I getting sufficient amounts of exercise? Am I drinking enough? Am I ensuring that I'm getting a sufficient amount of sleep? Am I feeding myself? All of these biological needs, as much as it seems really obvious, I think these are almost a foundation, because it's so much harder to think things through, and a lot of the strategies that we can be talking about are very much about your capacity to reflect on your experiences, think it through, and then use it in a way to think more optimally about the situation you're in. But being able to look after these biological components is also some of the things which you just need to do. And if you're not doing it because of the amount of pressure that you are currently under, it's just something to be mindful of about. Actually, it's worth, you deserve it. You know, self-care is really, really essential. And I think, as easy as it is to say, it's about carving that time. So what I'm going to talk about now is some of the 8 psychological strategies that underpin what we believe enables you to deal with those challenges. And these could be things that you can use in a moment, or they could be things that you can use to reflect on your experiences and use it in a way to actually go, okay, I've been through this experience. Can I reflect on it more effectively? And I think when you think about 2020 and the significant challenges many of you have directly faced, nobody on this call, if you're working for NHS, you probably have a whole host of achievements that you have done in the last year that you should be ultimately super proud of. And so being able to reflect on those experiences and say to yourself, I went through this and I survived and I managed it, is also something which I would really recommend. So I'm going to talk through these strategies, but in essence, they're about reframing situations in a way that help you, is about doing things that can help you on a day-to-day level, and is about engaging with others in a way that helps you too. And this model as well is something which we developed about 10 years ago. We've always got very positive feedback, but I think the thing which was really nice to also see is that there's been completely separate research being done by a group looking at all the research that's out there, and they've basically confirmed this 8 factor model that we've kind of developed. So what are those 8 strategies? So the first one, which is not showing optimism. So the first one is actually self-belief. And self-belief is the ability for us to basically believe in our ability to deal with challenge and change effectively. So this in particular is one where I feel it's not about your actual capacity. So sometimes there's a differentiation between how much you believe you're able to deal with challenge and change and the actual competence, i.e. the reality of your ability to deal with that challenge and change. And those don't always match. Sometimes somebody's extremely capable of dealing with challenge and change again and again and again, but they don't give themselves credit for it. So self-belief is a really foundational one, because if you don't believe in your capacity to do and deal with challenge, you're less likely to give yourself credit. So I think with this one, if you're keen to develop it, is about reflecting on your experiences, writing down what you've achieved. And I think very fundamentally, if you are here right now, you've gone through what you needed to go through 2020, and reflect on those experiences and the fact that you've got through it and achieved it and you did it, is about giving yourself credit. So if you want to develop this as something where giving yourself credit and focusing on it could be helpful to you. The next strategy is called optimism, and this is the extent to which an individual believes they'll experience good outcomes in life and the way they explain those setbacks. So one of the challenges I think many of us have had is that it's been hard to be optimistic sometimes when we're dealing with the current crisis, when you're kind of when people are going into lockdown, out of lockdown, and right now when we are currently experiencing the highest levels of COVID since the pandemic began. I imagine that working in hospitals right now has never been more challenging. So it's hard sometimes to be optimistic about things, but it's fundamentally valuable because it keeps you focused on the positives. And when you think about this, it's about recognizing that when you're going through an event, however difficult it may be, there is always, and going back to sort of one of the comments earlier, where it was about actually that resilience is about being able to see the